with a particular woman and how he so surgically just cuts that label right off and what we can learn from it. If you wanted to open up your Bibles to Matthew chapter 15, Matthew 15, verses 21 through 28, we have one of these label-destroying stories. Now, whenever we approach one of these stories, it's good to ask two questions. One, what can we learn about Jesus in this story? What can we learn about Jesus? And secondly, what can we learn about ourselves? I don't know if you do this. I tend to be guilty in this affair, but whenever I read a story in the Bible, I automatically always put myself in the role of the good guy. Funny how we do that, huh? If you really want to grow, and if you really want to see some insights, put yourself in the place of the bad guy. Well, here we're going to see what we can learn from Jesus and what we can learn about ourselves. If you don't have a Bible, don't fear, it's going to be up on the screen. Verse 21 says this: leaving that place, Jesus withdrew to the region of Tyre and Sidon. As the passage begins, Jesus leaves the shores of the Sea of Galilee, and he travels to a region that is considered to be unclean in Jewish eyes. Tyre and Sidon, or Phoenicia, which today is part of Lebanon, was outside the established boundaries of Israel, and it was an area that was just loaded with pagans and other suspect characters. Yet Jesus walks boldly into it, and it doesn't take long for one of the locals to discover the presence of Jesus there and start making a scene. Now, Matthew defines this person as a Canaanite woman. What does it mean when someone is called a Canaanite woman in this context? Well, what Matthew is doing is that he's emphasizing her background as among the earliest inhabitants of this region. But more than that, Canaanite meant someone who was a long-established, hardened pagan and a long-time enemy of the Jews. Now, verse 22. A Canaanite woman, there's Matthew giving her that title, from that vicinity came to him crying out, "Lord, Son of David, have mercy on me. My daughter is suffering terribly from demon possession." This Gentile woman meets Jesus and his followers on her home turf and immediately accosts them and cries out, "Have mercy on me, Lord, Son of David, my daughter is tormented by a demon." Now, the strict behavioral codes of the New Testament at this time in the Near Eastern culture sternly frowned on any woman approaching a man. And so, again, her character is becoming more suspect. Not only is she a Canaanite woman, but now she's breaking the social mores of the day by approaching a man. And not only is this woman unescorted by a man, she has a daughter who's demon-possessed. In an age in which it was a commonly held conviction that all diseases, especially demon possession, resulted from past sinfulness, her character rating is slipping further and further and further now. The disciples must have been thinking, what has this woman done that her daughter has become demon-possessed? She's a Canaanite woman. She's a woman who approaches a man unescorted, and her daughter is demon-possession. Jesus, you are scraping the bottom of the humanity barrel. Verse 23. Interesting reaction here by Jesus. Scriptures tell us that Jesus did not answer her a word. So his disciples came to him and urged him, Send her away, for she keeps crying out after us. Jesus' first response to this woman is actually very confusing to understand. I mean, here's a woman in desperate need, crying out to the Savior, and Jesus doesn't say anything. It almost could give the sense that he's blowing her off. I can imagine some of the disciples saying, finally, Jesus got the label right. He's realizing that she's a Canaanite woman who has a demon-possessed daughter, and so she doesn't deserve his time at all. So, ramping up their excitement and their nastiness, they call out, Jesus, send her away. She's annoying. She's bugging us. She keeps crying out after us. Just get rid of her. It's like the disciples are saying, hey lady, go home. You don't belong here. But now let's take a look at verse 24. He answered her, and he said to her, I was sent only to the lost house of Israel. Now, that might not be a whole lot better than the silent treatment she just got. At least it seems on the surface. Because isn't, in essence, Jesus telling her, listen, I came for a certain group of people, and you're not part of that group. What's Jesus doing here? How do we understand this side of Jesus that seems to be so confusing to us? That seems to be almost rude. No, don't worry, we're going to unpack this. But I can imagine the disciples, when Jesus said that to this woman, I was sent only to the lost sheep of Israel, I can imagine them saying, exactly. You tell her, Jesus. Now verse 25, we read this. The woman came and knelt before him. Lord, help me. So now she's begging. She drops down on her knees and she's just pleading. Verse 26. Now this is where the confusion really starts setting in. Jesus replies to her, it's not right to take the children's bread and toss it to their dogs. Okay, so let's summarize the responses of Jesus to this point. First of all, he ignores her, or seemingly ignores her. Then he says, you're not part of the group I came for. And then he seemingly insults her. This isn't the Jesus that I know and love. What's going on here? Could it be that we have misunderstood what Jesus is really doing here? And the answer to that is yes. Let me see if we could start to explain how the love of Jesus really shines through in his reaction to this woman, and it's not what it seems to be on the surface. First of all, when we take a look at the words of verse 26 here, when Jesus says it's not right to take the bread from the children, toss it to the dogs, a lot of Bible commentators believe that Jesus was simply role-playing for his disciples, that he was showing them exactly how unfeeling and heartless and downright insensitive the Jews treated the Gentiles. That by his actions he was trying to say, hey, listen, this is what it looks like when you treat people this way. You want to see what you look like? Okay, I'm going to show you what you look like. This is what it looks like when you do it. I don't think that's necessarily true, though. I'm not sure about that. Because I think the disciples probably would have not seen anything wrong with Jesus saying what he did to this woman. And may have even said or thought something like, good move, Jesus. You're learning. But in Matthew 7, verse 6, Jesus says this, do not give what is holy to the dogs. Now that's a different passage than what we're looking at, but the reason why I bring it up is because we have to understand what Jesus was saying here when he used the word dogs. Was this an absolute slam to a woman in need, or was he really saying something different? Trying to show the disciples that their labels were all wrong. The disciples would have called her a dog, no doubt about it. But what about Jesus? Well, in Matthew 7, verse 6, where I read, do not give what is holy to the dogs, the word that Jesus uses here in the Greek is kuon. Kuon. If we were to transliterate that into English, it would be spelled K-U-O-N. Kuon. Now, a kuon is the term for a stray dog. A stray dog. A scavenger type of dog. The word was also used as a metaphor for an impure person. But in our story, Jesus doesn't call her a kuon. He calls her a kunarion. Kunarion. What's the difference? The difference is that when Jesus used the word dog here, kunarion is actually the word for a little dog or a pet or a puppy. It was not the label that the disciples were wanting to give her, that she's just a dog. In fact, we have that very unkind vernacular in our language today. Two young teenage boys are talking, and they're talking about a girl, and she's not very pretty. What do they say? She's a dog. It's a very disparaging term when it's used in the wrong way. But if those two boys were talking about a girl and they would say, you know, she's as cute as a puppy. It's the same animal, but it's a totally different meaning. This is what Jesus is doing here. But instead of disputing her status as second in line behind the mission to Israel, she simply acknowledges what Jesus has called her, and she replies this way, yes, Lord. But even the dogs eat the crumbs that fall from their master's table. This, I'm sure, must have put a smile on the face of Jesus, because it's almost like Jacob wrestling with the angel. Do you remember in the book of Genesis when Jacob is wrestling and he cries out, Lord, I will not let you go unless you bless me. And at that point, Jacob is given a new name. That's when he's given the name Israel. And I think at that moment, God must have been saying, Jacob gets it. He gets it. He's not going to let go of me. Even though so many things may be discouraging him, he's going to wrestle until he knows that he's accepted by me. This is this woman. She's kind of like a New Testament Jacob. I'm not going to let go, Jesus. You have something for me. I don't even care if it's crumbs. I want it. I want what you have for me. Shortly after my wife's mother contracted rheumatoid arthritis at the age of 19, she suffered all of her life with this very debilitating arthritis. Her hands were all gnarled and out of shape from the arthritis, and she was in a lot of pain for most of her life. She was a church school teacher in our conference for many years, and she is somebody who I always respected as a woman who had both feet on the ground, very level-headed, very logical, thought through decisions carefully before she made them. But when she was a young woman, she flew out west to sit in the caves of Montana because she heard somewhere that there was something about the air in the caves of Montana that would help cure rheumatoid arthritis. The reason I bring that up is I'm trying to emphasize that when people are desperate, they'll try anything. This woman is desperate. She's willing to try anything, and she's not going to take no for an answer. In fact, talking about people who are desperate, Arthur Ken Collins writes in his book, Scraps from the Table, interestingly enough, since we're talking about crumbs falling from the table, says this: "My grandmother wore copper bracelets for her arthritis in accordance with a then popular folk cure. She wore them not because they offered any relief, but simply because she figured they couldn't hurt anything and they just might help. Finally, she stopped wearing them when her doctor convinced her that she had an adverse reaction to the copper. Then she started drinking a mixture of vinegar and honey, which was supposed to do the same thing. It didn't help her either, but it didn't hurt anything. So in many cases, when desperate people come to Jesus for help, he makes them examine their motives. In effect, he asks them, do you really believe I can do this, or am I just another copper bracelet? When this woman comes to Jesus, she's putting all her eggs in that basket. Jesus, you got to do this for me. But remember now, the Jews had called the Gentiles dogs all the time, but not the kind of dog that Jesus used for this woman. They considered Gentiles as those stray dogs, those scavenger dogs, those dirty dogs. But Jesus considers her his puppy. His puppy. She, in essence, is saying to Jesus, all right, you want to call me a dog? Go right ahead. You want to call me a pet dog? I've got no problem with that. But if I'm a little house dog, Jesus, if I'm a little puppy, then that means I got a master. You see, those stray dogs that are out there left on their own to fend for themselves, they don't have a master. They have to go digging here and there to find what they're going to eat. They don't know where their next meal is coming from, but not a house dog, Jesus. A house dog has a master. And so, Jesus, just crumbs from your table will be enough for me. Crumbs. When you think about crumbs, what are crumbs? Crumbs are the remnant of a meal, right? They're those little pieces on the plate after we're done eating. Crumbs are what no one wants anymore. Crumbs are the fragments of a satisfying dinner. Crumbs are what we wipe off of our mouth. But Jesus hears from this woman, I don't care, Jesus. Your crumbs are good enough for me. Just like that little dog, just hoping for a little morsel, is this woman. She was recognized that Jesus was no ordinary man, no ordinary prophet, no ordinary healer. She had faith that his crumbs were better than anybody else's dinner. And so she says, Lord, just your crumbs are enough. Just a little morsel from your hand will give me more than I ever needed. The story's not over yet. The story's not over yet. Because Jesus affirms her. He says, woman, great is your faith. Your request is granted. And her daughter was healed from that very hour. Amen. You see, the reason why I want to use this story, entitled this sermon, What Jesus Sees, is because Jesus sees things in people that we don't see. 1 Samuel 16:9 reaffirms that when he says, man looks on the outward appearance, but God, he looks at the heart. And so maybe it would be good in our relationships with one another to try to look at the person's heart and not just what's on the outside. Years ago, I read an article in the Reader's Digest that really made an impression on me, and I've never forgot the lesson of it. It talked about a rogue elephant over in Africa that was terrorizing a particular village, and it had killed several people. And so they finally decided, we got to kill this rogue elephant before he kills more people. And so they formed a hunting party. They went out and they shot